Hello, everybody, and welcome. This is the beginning of the eWave digital series, a fourth one across the globe that we've run. And today we're specifically focused on our healthcare clients. Joining me today, we have Andy Peebler from Salesforce as a partner, who is VP of Commerce Cloud Go-to-Market. Together, we have Tony Chubb, who is the IT partner lead at Cochlear, as well as Simon Marks, Head of Digital for Hartman. A little bit about eWave. We are the independent commerce leader that started off 10 years ago and is now today 280 strong across 11 cities around the globe. We have been partnering with Cochlear and Hartman, as well as other clients in the healthcare and beauty industry around digital transformation. So I'd like to introduce in a little bit more detail, Tony Chubb, Simon and Andy. I'm going to revert to Tony now to give a little bit of introduction about who is Cochlear. Cochlear, who is famous in Australia, but maybe some of our guests across the globe are not aware. Tony, over to you.
Thanks, Camille. You can hear me and see me?
Very well.
Great.
Thanks.
All right. Well, thanks for having me today. So yeah, a little bit more about Cochlear. So we are the market leader in implantable hearing solutions. So that basically means hearing solutions for more severe forms of hearing loss. So you can think about that in terms of perhaps when hearing aids, which I'm sure most of you would be familiar with. So for when hearing aids no longer meet the need. So it is for more sort of severe to profound hearing loss. We've been around for near on 40 years. As it stands today, we have a customer base of about 550,000 people globally. We sell in over 180 countries. About 30 of those are direct, and the rest through a distributor network. And in terms of our size, we have about 4,000 employees globally, but we are headquartered here in Sydney on campus at Macquarie University.
Thank you, Tony.
And myself, I've been at Cochlear for, I'll be clocking up about, I think it's 10 years next July.
Wonderful. Thank you, Tony. And over to you, Simon. A little bit about Hartman and yourself.
Yes, hi everybody. Thanks for having me. So yeah, Simon Marks, the digital for Australia for Paul Hartman. Paul Hartman is a 200-year-old company. We're a multinational healthcare company headquartered out of Germany. So we operate in surgical equipment, disinfection, hygiene, continence, wound products. We operate through hospitals, aged care. We're now increasingly getting into online and pharmacy and direct. So yes, broad spread across the world, different sizes in different regions. We're about 10,000 people. So I've been with Hartman for about 3 years. Prior to that, I was head of digital marketing at Westpac. And I then before that, I spent 10 years at Blackmores heading up their online division.
Another Australian icon. Thank you.
Yeah.
And Andy Peebler, thank you for joining us from California today, or this evening, your time. You're on mute, Andy.
There we go. That helps. I'm thrilled to be here. Thanks, Camille, for having me.
Thank you.
So, I as you said earlier, I lead go-to-market for our Commerce Cloud here at Salesforce. You know, many people know Salesforce, obviously, is a big company that grew up in the sales and service CRM realm. And we now have, among lots of other capabilities, one of the largest commerce cloud practices on the planet, and have thousands of B2C and B2B commerce customers, helping to serve them through our partners such as eWave, and just super excited to be here today with everyone.
Thanks, Andy. And lastly, I'd like to introduce Daniel Day, who is our eWave experience specialist leading the charter globally. So thanks, Daniel, for joining as well. I'm sure we'll allude to you for some questions related to eWave and commerce later on. I guess just to set the scene, we've chosen to do this webinar on healthcare. Everybody knows we're all experiencing COVID at the moment as a pandemic. But the reason why we chose Cochlear and Hartman, because the two organizations that have a lot of heritage in a heavily regulated environment, embarked on their digital transformation journey long before COVID. So I guess I was really curious to find out from Tony and Simon as to at what stage were you prompted to invest more heavily in the digital journey that you already were on? And this is prior to COVID. And how have you now enjoyed and reaped the benefits as the organization getting ahead of the curve? So over to you, Simon, if you want to share a little bit of insights around that.
Yeah, sure. Thank you for that, Camille. Look, interesting journey for me as well as a professional last 3 years at Hartman. So when I joined the business, I was approached to head up commerce in Australia, and it was even then I think we had a slightly more siloed approach. Australia was one of probably a half a dozen markets in our business that was what I'd call digitally mature, and we certainly had other regions that weren't. But for me, I think the real marker of that sort of readiness for change probably came about with a new managing director. So I think this has been a theme for me at Hartman, where the leadership has really defined that vision. We had a new managing director come into the business, and obviously, like most MDs, there's got to be a growth strategy. So as you've rightly alluded to, in health, there's often mature markets. Certainly in our business here, you know, a lot of the work is contract and tender. So getting growth is really hard. And I think it was obvious to our current managing director that innovation, technology, and digital transformation was one rich, you know, stream there that could be, you know, looked at as a way to get growth. So what she did, this is Britta Funsbrook, was she created a digital board. So there was a governance and structure there. She also appointed and hired a new role, a chief digital officer. So I think that's been probably the start. In terms of what we've reaped, I think it's ongoing, to be honest. Not just COVID aside, like many businesses, we've had to pivot to the opportunities from COVID, being a company that works in disinfection, but also the challenges with supply chain. So I wouldn't say that we have fully reaped the benefits yet, but as you've alluded to, I think being a little bit ahead, like many companies I'm seeing which have been forced into this conversation because of circumstances, we are probably a little bit ahead in that regard.
Thank you. That's really interesting. Over to Tony. What about yourselves over at Cochlear?
Yeah, probably a few similar points. So I mentioned I started at Cochlear about 10 years ago. I think at that point, Cochlear was really starting to look into the opportunities presented through digital. And for us, you know, we do have a massive growth opportunity, not in terms of sort of global expansion in our footprint, but more the opportunity and the underserved need in terms of the sheer number of people that are impacted by hearing loss. And at the moment, you know, in Australia, Cochlear is a very well-known brand. The Cochlear implant was invented here in Australia. If you talk to most people, I think they have an awareness of that as a solution, but that's not so much the case in other markets. So looking at where digital could play a role in terms of awareness of that as a solution for more severe forms of hearing loss, but also as we grow that customer base, making sure that the experience is as seamless as possible. You know, once you go down this path, our customers are now dependent upon their device and their hearing professionals and us as an organisation to stay in hearing. So whether that means buying new parts and accessories, making sure you've got a stock of batteries, or, you know, if there's an issue with your device, that we can get that serviced and repaired and back on the air as quickly as possible. It's a really big commitment that we make to make sure that our customers can stay in hearing, and digital plays an increasing role in that. So for the period of time that I've been at Cochlear, that's really been an area that I've focused on, and I've seen an increasing focus on that and sort of ownership at an exec level in that space. Yeah, and similar again to Simon, I think we're seeing the benefits still really coming to fruition, but certainly in the last 6 months with COVID, a lot of the things that we had been working on, particularly in the sort of the telehealth space, we're seeing a much greater willingness for our professional partners to take on these telehealth solutions, which is fantastic, because it's a great outcome for them and for our customers. Whereas before there was a little bit more concern around sort of heading down that path, a number of things considered. So we've really been able to make a lot of progress in terms of how we're rolling out a lot of those sort of remote care telehealth solutions.
So as a result of COVID, you would say that a lot of the investment direction has been accelerated in that telehealth path?
exactly.
Yeah, nice.
And if it
What
and
about for
if,
you,
and if it
Simon?
hadn't, if it hadn't, we'd probably still be roughly where we were 6 months ago in terms of trying to sell the benefits and get people to sort of come on board. You know, people saw the benefit in it, but they really needed that extra push and sense of urgency, and out of pure necessity, you know, to stay in operation and to continue to support customers with our devices. We needed to go down this path. So it's really opened that door, which has been a positive outcome of all of this.
Very positive. Simon, in your line of business, wound care and incontinence, I'd imagine there'd be some benefits with online complementing the customer experience from a discretionary perspective or discreteness. Are you noticing as a result of COVID that certain areas of your digital transformation have accelerated?
Well, look, I think in what I'm involved in, it was, you know, the work I've been doing is probably predates COVID, but from a customer perspective, absolutely a bit similar to Tony. A lot of what we do is education. So we have a lot of in servicing. We go to aged care, particularly, and anyone in Australia would know how challenging the aged care market has been, access to care homes with COVID. So we've seen a huge adoption of virtual training, and it's just gone from a sort of almost a non-conversation to an assumption that we have to have it. So I think that's a positive outcome. I know some people have mentioned that. If there's anything that's been good about COVID, it's been, I think, accelerating acceptance in Australia of things like virtual, you know, just content meetings. So we have people, and many of our staff are people who are not what I call in any way digital natives. You know, these are often ex-nurses, people who do not enjoy using computers, and now they are basically conducting team sessions and having all sorts of great interactions with their customers all across this big country of ours, and doing it very efficiently. So yeah, we've definitely seen that as a side benefit of what's been going on.
Thank you, Simon. Over to Andy with a global view as well. I know we have a lot of our guests based in Sydney, but in terms of what you're seeing around the globe, is that a similar situation where investments are accelerated in the commerce space and in a particular fashion, traditional industries that have not dedicated a stream of work or investments in this space are now starting to pay attention a lot more than previous to COVID?
Yeah, very much so, Camille. And, you know, it's interesting in that COVID had this, you know, interesting effect of accelerating digital transformation for many companies that were kind of on a path already. It certainly introduced the notion of digital transformation for a whole host of other kinds of companies that just hadn't started it. But as our panelists here have alluded to, many companies kind of started the process well before COVID, because, you know, for a long time we've known that, you know, even if end purchases don't always end online, people are doing a lot of research and exploration and discovery of products across health and all aspects of life. So I think, you know, many companies have been sort of inching down that path for a long time. What COVID has done is really sort of pressure and force a lot of the cultural objections that had been there in the past. Again, our panelists here are kind of illustrating that with some really good tangible examples of people who probably wouldn't have lined up to online enablement or training previously, but have really no choice but kind of embrace it now. We've seen just tons of examples like that. And so to the extent there is a silver lining from the current crisis, I think it is bringing a lot of people to the table from sort of a change management and just change of business process modernization vibe that probably weren't open to those things historically. So in those respects, I think, you know, there's going to be a lot of benefits that come to companies for the kinds of investments and choices, you know, they're making just now. And the other thing that we've seen a lot of, which again, I think the folks on this call have done a really good job highlighting, are the sort of intrinsic connectivity between like digital experiences on the front and then, you know, a whole host of other participants in that, you know, patient journey. So their provider for sure. Other distribution companies that have a role to play here because they're touching product and helping, you know, patients and customers get product. So that being able to have all of those pieces connected so that, you know, you're really providing a comprehensive journey, especially in health, is just exceptionally important. And for that, I just feel really blessed to work at Salesforce, where we have, you know, great capabilities from a back-end perspective, CRM, service apps, et cetera, that can sort of take handoffs and manage the offline parts of that journey as well as the online ones.
Thank you, Andy. Certainly at eWave, having worked with clients around the globe and seeing that traditionally the direct-to-consumer path hasn't been an easy one, where distributors have needed to be factored in from a business model standpoint, and hence the reluctance to invest and cannibalize the distribution channels, certainly in the retail space from manufacturers. But I'm keen to hear from Tony and Simon again on what considerations did both organizations need to make around their business model change as they accelerated, besides telehealth, but in terms of your distributorship. I think, Tony, you mentioned that the online experience is turned on a lot more in places where you don't have strong distributorship networks, perhaps. But is that the case? And is that a consideration that needed to be factored in?
Yeah, it definitely is from a distributor perspective, but I think the thing that's been more prevalent for us in considering how we move forward with some of this stuff is the partnership with our our audiologists and surgeons, so our professional partners. Traditionally Cochlear had been much more of a B2B organization. We manufactured the implant, the device itself, and that was pretty much as far as we went. But we've realized that we had to play more of a role in terms of making sure that the clinical care model was scalable and efficient and effective, and the customer experience was as good as it could be, and as consistently good as it could be. But in doing that, we have to be really careful that we don't cut our professional partners out of the loop. So they still have a really important role to play in that clinical sense. So getting the sort of the triangle right, if you like, of Cochlear, the professional partner, and the customer, and that sort of connectivity between the three. Clearly, we have a role to play from a B2C perspective, much more than we did, but we need to do that in the right sense of partnership, and making sure that the audiologist, for example, is still able to ply their trade as they need to get the outcome for the customer. So that's been much more of a consideration for us, and a lot of our sort of telehealth stuff is linking, the three of us, the three entities, if you like, the customer, the health professional, and us.
Nice, thanks, Tony. What about you, Simon? I know you alluded to growth before, and digital being a key channel for growth. Do you see much consideration needing to be given to the various dimensions of your distributorships, your business partners, and do you see much overlap in between your customers offline versus online?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Not always easy to track. I mean, look, it's I think there's a different narrative in Europe than from Australia. So in Australia, our dynamics are different, and absolutely that whole issue of cannibalization of keeping big distributors happy is really vital here. A lot of our sales are done in, we talk about containers because we bring containers from Europe. So in terms of looking at the opportunity for growth, you have to plan things out well in advance. It's 3 months to get product from Europe to Australia. So looking at opportunities is a balancing act. I think part of the opportunity is a bit similar to what Tony was talking about, which is the clinical side. So again, in our space is B2B, which means that you don't get a lot of price elasticity. It's not about discounting. It's not about that kind of retail mindset. It's about those very rare opportunities you get to get new business. And as I said, a lot of our business is contract and tender. So the clinical side and the technology opportunity there, I think, is going to be a differentiator in the future. In terms of direct, I think it's a bigger opportunity in Europe. So I think competition with pharmacy in Europe and different markets in Europe will be different. It's hard here. In Australia, you've got quite a closed shop. You've got very big players in the pharmacy space, so you really have to partner with them. To be really frank with you, for us to take on a pharmacy business would be a big challenge in Australia. Probably not our first priority. It would just be too difficult. Probably the wrong thing to do as well.
Thank you for sharing that. Now, I mentioned earlier that healthcare is heavily regulated around the globe. As you've expanded your digital footprint, what considerations did you need to make there? And were there any surprises as far as the variance on healthcare regulations?
Is that one for me, Camille?
Over to Tony.
Tony, you go, Tony.
Sure, I'll have a go at that. Yeah, so I mean, we're this was kind of new to me personally, joining Cochlear 10 years ago. So we're a Class 3 medical device company. So, abiding by the right regulations is just a part of what we have to do. And it's been a big learning for me. We have a big focus on that at Cochlear. So making sure that those sorts of conversations are happening as early as possible, so there aren't surprises. But there's a whole range of things to consider that aren't unique to Cochlear, whether it's HIPAA compliance in the US, Bertrand law in France, or whatever the case might be. There's a whole bunch of regulations that we need to be aware of, and it just needs to be baked into your process so that you are not dealing with these things at the 11th hour. And for Cochlear, as I said, as a medical device manufacturer, it's just a part of what we do. So I wouldn't say so much that there are surprises, but it is really just a fact of life. And in digital, that's no different.
Thank you, Tony. And what about you, Simon? Anything to add
Yeah,
to
look,
that?
yeah, look, a little bit different from Tony in that we're low-level medical products, so we don't have the same kind of rigor in our own market as probably Cochlear would have. But what has been square in front for me has been GDPR, and in Europe to some extent MDR. So GDPR, for those who don't know, is the General Data Protection policies in Europe, which has been a bit of a minefield, more internally than customer facing. For the MDR, medical devices doesn't really impact Australia. But GDPR has been quite a challenge because both in person in Germany and here remotely, have had so many discussions with our data protection people, with lawyers, to understand if there really is any impact. Obviously, the GDPR we're not a jurisdiction for that. But when you think about where data is housed, when you think about where the transfer of information occurs, it's been a big part of my conversations and thought process for the last probably 18 months or so. So just getting a handle, when you are a very European-centric business as we are, what it might mean for regional business as well. It's been quite interesting.
Yeah, to remain compliant, there's a lot of effort involved. Yeah, thank you.
Yep.
Andy, are you seeing this being a sticking point for some of the clients that are on Salesforce around the compliance factor and how the platform supports that? Andy? Have we lost you? I think maybe we've got a bit of audio issue there. So I'm going to just go.
I can jump in there on something that's Salesforce related, actually, while waiting for Andy. So when I was at Westpac, we worked with Salesforce very closely. And one thing that we saw, which is fascinating, in not so much in health, but it could be in health, but certainly in banking, was offshore data. So, here we are as a bank in Australia that would not allow Salesforce to hold our data up because it was offshore. And Salesforce is a huge business with probably the best cloud security you could hope for, and yet we had to go to great lengths to tokenize and anonymize data because of our own compliance that wouldn't allow us to work with Salesforce if there was going to be infrastructure that Salesforce was going to manage that was off Australian shores. So that was a real eye-opener for me a few years back. I'm not sure whether that is something that Tony's experienced, but yeah, the management of onshore, offshore data, even when the supplier is as big as Salesforce, was a challenge I faced in the past anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
but you've overcome that, right?
I'm
Tony, did you have something to add?
Yeah, no, I am. I'm nodding. I'm agreeing.
Yeah,
that has been a bit of a learning. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
What other platform considerations did you need to make when you embarked on this journey a while ago, Tony? You mentioned to me privately that there was a number of considerations around why you chose Salesforce. Did you want to share a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I mean, we're at a point where we're facing an end of life situation for our current platform. So and a pretty significant effort to move on from that. So we did look around a couple of things where we wanted to have a true cloud setup. That was one factor, but some of the other key requirements, this is something that we're trying to do as efficiently and effectively as possible to work in different markets. And what we don't want to do is take 3 or 4 years to roll this out to all of our key markets. That we needed this to be managed in a way that was as globally consistent as possible, but that does meet the maybe the 10% of variation that you do need to meet in different countries. And whether that's the fact that there's variation in availability of product in different markets, but all the core stuff around, tax, shipping. There may be other compliance factors that are local to various markets, but that we are really trying to keep this as consistent as possible. And I would say that at Cochlear over the years, it had operated on a more federated basis more generally. So there was a lot of latitude out in the regions and countries to do what we needed to do. But now that we're increasing in scale, which we're kind of, people say we've gone from being a big small company to a small big company, if that makes sense. And in making that transition, we're still going through that. Yeah, we're going through that sort of growing pain at the moment, and trying to not dominate globally and make everyone do things the same way if that's not the right thing to do. But we really do need to do things in a scalable manner, and that was really a focus for us in sort of the platform selection, not just for this, but other areas that we're embarking on similar initiatives.
Interesting. Thank you, Tony. Simon, you were nodding.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, very similar challenges. I mean, one thing I've noticed even in 3 years at Hartman is that, similar to Tony, there was a lot of latitude by country, and countries kind of, you talk about shadow IT or grey IT, where countries would go around infrastructure centrally because it probably wasn't up to scratch, which of course then creates legacy issues. We even had similar platforms in different countries that were kind of cloned for each market, and then were sort of developed separately, which then means you end up having 5 systems to manage, not one. Whereas now we're in a mindset of having a central infrastructure which we configure by market, which is much more efficient. But there's a learning curve. The other one was infrastructure. So for us, back in the day, infrastructure was all in Germany, and there was obviously latency problems. So we would often complain about not just performance, but also things like maintenance being done in the middle of our business day in Europe that would impact our business day. So SLAs and those kind of things were challenging. We've now moved to Microsoft Azure infrastructure, but that's also been, it's going to be much more beneficial long term because it's scalable in region. But tuning that and onboarding that has been a learning curve as well, both from a database management perspective, but also the cost of doing it. And they're just trying to see it in different regions. So we have colleagues in Europe saying, no, it's fine. And we're saying, no, it's slow. Or we'll say, no, it's going really well. And the Europeans will be saying, but it's not going well for us. We're not getting the performance. So it's just about education at the end of the day for your own people, particularly for even our IT colleagues. They're on a learning curve as well. But yeah, I think that's the way we're all heading, is that sort of centralization, so the infrastructure supports out, but you're not dependent on only one hub, in one location, which can really be a handbrake.
So you're spreading risk across the globe as well as your tech infrastructure. Andy, did you have something to add there as well? We were talking about, well, we lost you, the healthcare regulatory compliance as a platform consideration, and also the cloud and infrastructure considerations around selecting platform. Did you have something to add from a Salesforce perspective around what you're seeing as a sticking point for a lot of clients to choose one way or another? Sorry, you're on mute again. Andy, if you could unmute.
Can you hear me now? Is that?
Yes, very well.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you. All right, is this okay?
Yeah, we can hear you loud and clear.
Perfect. Okay, so yes, it is for sure pretty common to hear about regulatory challenges or even concerns about how to kind of navigate the environment globally. And that's why it's become a much more important part of our product management process, especially in healthcare, to sort of design for the requirements we encounter globally. And, it's something that we're, putting a lot of energy in, particularly for our healthcare clients, to try to make this easier in future years.
Okay, thanks, Sandy. I'm just going to turn our attention to the people aspect of the business in terms of going digital, investing in commerce. As a business for Simon, what considerations have you had to make there in terms of how the team was structured? You mentioned earlier around the strategy and how you fit that. Was there a lot of restructuring that needed to occur? New skills you needed to consider hiring in?
Look, I think yes. Again, probably more in Europe and Germany than in Australia, although we have had some contract resources over here. I think what's been fascinating for our business is expectation about what is new revenue and innovation versus what is business as usual. So while we've had a lot of focus on innovation, we have a tech hub now based in Hamburg that's looking at, I guess, a combination of blue sky and new opportunity. We also, like most businesses, have old legacy as well. So what I often think about is, can you really leapfrog? Can you go from legacy, older systems, and also a customer base that's used to that experience, and leapfrog to something completely future forward? Or do you have to go on a bit of a journey? And I think the answer is probably to go on that journey. And that's where we're focused in Australia, is really on updating systems and UX. There's a much bigger focus on that. I think also for our IT team, historically, they've been tasked with building things internally. And so it's been a mind shift for them to think about the customer experience, which is not something that they've typically thought of before. So I think the challenge there is business process mapping to IT solutions, particularly global as well. And it's a challenge. You've got centralized IT, have to build a platform to work in 20 markets and 15 countries. It's really hard for them to capture all the requirements and balance them. But on the other hand, the learning curve is that when something's implemented one way, it has a business impact that maybe another part of the business, particularly IT, could not have imagined would be the case. And you have to then remap, redesign, revisit. So you have to iterate. And I think we're seeing that. You have to also balance that with local expectation and patience about what you're expected to deliver. So that's another piece of the balancing act. So yes, very much a people task. The time zones don't help for us. So again, multiple continents and time zones makes it a bit harder. Fortunately for me, I've been to Germany, where we're based, many times before COVID. So I've built relationships, built trust, and I know the people I'm talking to, which helps. But yeah, I think the people part is absolutely essential.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Simon. Any additional new skills that didn't exist prior to you joining and needed to be acquired in as capability or capacity from your perspective, Simon?
Yeah, I think the CX piece. I mean, look, also Agile too. So Agile. Yeah, Agile was, like a lot of companies, kind of adopted a bit piecemeal. We've had training, and I worked with Agile in previous companies in the Westpac as well. But that learning curve of Agile, how it's interpreted. We have a lot of contractors that we work with too. So how does the culture work in different parts of the world with the way people are managed? I don't know that we've got to pure Agile, but we're trying a hybrid, like a lot of businesses. So that's been a journey as well.
A bit of a fail fast and innovation fast.
Yeah, exactly.
Nice.
But I think you've always got that fear factor. And again, I think it's a cultural thing with older, not I say old school IT, but with previous cultures and IT teams, that there is a fear of failure. So you have to balance that fear of failure with the honesty of trying new things and being brave. So it's never straightforward, but it's certainly interesting.
What about you, Tony, from Cochlear's
perspective?
Again,
very. I'd make very similar points, like the shift from having an IT organization that's focused on big monolithic ERP system type work to customer facing self-service type solutions, where the benchmark is set much higher than the usability of an ERP system, and you don't know what you don't know until you get some of this stuff into the hands of your customers, and being open to that. Yeah. That feedback and being able to respond to it, actually, rolls off the tongue really easily. But to be able to operate in that manner and have a delivery model that makes it okay to sort of break things down, test things out in the market, and to be able to respond, that is a skill and a trade that even 10 years ago wasn't really present at Cochlear. And now you look at UX as a practice, and we've really had to focus on that internally. It's really front of mind as we get into some of this stuff, and we have made huge leaps with our B2C online stores, where we just went, let's stop focusing on the technology and let's focus on the experience, and particularly focused on the US as our biggest market. And the results were just outstanding in terms of the conversion rates. Now, we're pretty lucky. We have a captive audience, right? It's not a discretionary purchase, but we've got conversion rates on our B2C store of up over 10% in the US, which, when you look at other, I guess, retail stores, it's generally a lot lower than that. Again, different context, but we doubled that through a focus on UX, which basically means it's not probably incremental revenue for us, but it is a much better experience for customers that they're coming, they're seeing what they need, they're seeing the products that are relevant to their devices and their devices alone. They can reorder, the same set of batteries they did last time. All those really simple UX things based on feedback from customers is probably where we've made the biggest strides forward in terms of the efficacy of our B2C online stores. And so building that capability internally has been a big focus.
You mentioned earlier that it's a 5-year journey from hearing aid to implant, and how the experience online is supporting and enhancing and complementing that journey. And Simon, you mentioned
it can be. Yeah, it can be. It varies a lot, but often for me, it's a big life decision that people are making. And I'll just to be clear, where we focused our e-commerce and online purchasing experience has not been in that front end of the funnel. Like, that's a much bigger thing. So we do focus a lot of our digital activity on awareness and getting people to see the right health professionals. What I was just referring to then was for our existing customers and how we keep them on the air and buying the right sort of parts and accessories for their hearing device. But yeah, you're right, that journey, that sort of candidate journey, as we call it, can be several years.
Thank you. And in terms of the customer journey, which we talked about, what about your digital journey around setting out with your vision, your roadmap? How far in are you at Cochlear, Tony?
Oh,
is it never ending?
Well, I think so. How far in are we? I'd like to give it a number, like a bit over 10 years probably. And were we ready then? No. Are we ready now? Don't know. Are you ever ready? Probably not. How do you get ready? You do it. I don't think it's a question of are you ready, because you're probably never ready. But your customers demand it, so you have to go there and figure out your own way through it. I think as an organisation, look, where I couldn't sort of describe to you where we're at in the journey, but I can't see an end to it. That's for sure.
It's constant innovation, isn't it?
Yeah. Who knows where we'll be in 5 years' time? I would expect that to the point that we've all made earlier around sort of telehealth and remote care, that if you look forward 5 years' time, that I would expect that the leaps we've made in the last 6 months would mean that will have become much more the norm, and that we'll be operating that way rather than it being something new that we're still figuring out.
Yeah. Andy, I know you're consciously helping clients, a lot of clients, move the needle on getting closer to that customer 360 through the one platform vision of Salesforce. What industries are you seeing are more progressive, and where does healthcare kind of fit in that maturity?
Well, I would say healthcare is among one of the more progressive industries, because we're seeing engagement from really all across the spectrum of the health industry, including, device companies, supplies, and PPE companies, both looking to automate sort of long tail aspects of their distribution, some on the B2B side.
Mm-hmm.
We're seeing consumer engagement, whether it's actually transacting for devices or simply driving awareness, driving education, and driving the connectivity to the provider, especially in times now in markets where certain surgeries are either allowed or not allowed. Lots of companies have a keen interest to understand their customers better, understand their patients better, and sort of help to kind of direct demand, especially on the device side, to suppliers who can, in fact, perform procedures. And then we're also seeing a lot of growth amongst providers and health insurance companies, even seeking to position plans or add-ons or prescriptions via healthcare plans. So it's a really robust space right now.
And are you seeing notable difference between countries, some that may be emerging a lot faster in their maturity and adoption, or similar around the globe at the moment?
I'd say a little bit more innovation coming out of EMEA and Asia, I would say. I think that lots of kind of beauty and those pharmaceuticals that sort of cradle beauty devices and more doctor assisted. There's lots of that movement in America. And then I'd say on the health insurance side, probably a little bit more in the US market too.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Dan, I'm going to just throw over to you for a question here. You work with clients day in, day out and partnering with them, helping them overcome challenges. What are some of the common challenges you're seeing outside of our guests here today, perhaps in other industries that echo what Simon shared around GDPR compliance, healthcare regulatory compliance, the people challenge around getting the right skills, getting leadership bought into the digital journey and skilled up for it? What are some of the other challenges? I mean, Andy mentioned change before. Did you have any others to add?
I think probably a couple of key ones to call out is around product management and also data as well, in terms of the customer data. So brands and businesses often have grand ambitions to deliver personalized experiences and deliver great experiences to the customer. And that's often reliant on having the right customer data in order to deliver those experiences. And it's a big challenge, right? When you think about all the proliferation of data that's out there from online to offline and merging those two together. That's a key challenge that I see. And also from a product data set point of view, when products or customers have a lot of products, managing those products and enriching those products as well is time sensitive and often difficult to manage. So those are probably a couple of the other key ones that I would call out.
Thank you, Dan. Simon, I'm going to go back to you. In terms of other challenges that you have met with in your fail fast and innovate quick mantra, have you come across other challenges that may have surprised you along the journey?
I'm not sure about surprise, but a bit similar to what Daniel was saying, integration, platform integration. So, connecting to Salesforce, connecting to SAP, join those dots with systems, and then product sets as well. So similar to what Dan was saying, we have, 6-7 versions of a product in our systems. So which one is the right version? Which one is stock in? Which one is stock out? Which one is obsolete? Which one is a replacement? Sometimes the data is in German, which can be fun when you're trying to look at product codes. So, and of course, you don't want to have the wrong product for sale. And we're talking about product codes here. So the physical product is the same, but the digital version of the product is different, and that enrichment is challenging. So, the synchronization of that can present challenges. I mean, sometimes we find products appearing on platforms that we don't want to be there because it's syncing from SAP. So how do we prevent that? How does the source of truth get retained? So those have been learning curves. And again, you're working with separate teams. There's a separate team for SAP, there's a separate team for CRM. So again, over distance, over time zone, sometimes with people you've never met before, that is definitely can be a challenge. It's just one you have to address.
Thank you, Simon. Yes, we're certainly seeing a lot of clients now wanting to connect their commerce with their CMS and their CDP and their CRM and ERP, in addition to all the payment gateways and all the other parts to what we consider as commerce at core. What other trends are you seeing that are starting to emerge now that are factoring into your considerations as part of your maturing of your commerce journey? I'm going to throw over to Tony to start.
Yeah, we're and it's probably quite unique to us. Actually, the first thing I want to say is it's so nice to hear of common challenges with other organisations. So I was nodding at everything you just said then, Simon. Like the online store experience that you see in front of your eyes is the tip of the iceberg, and there's so much that needs to happen beneath that to create that experience. So that's always nice to hear from other people. But yeah, in terms of looking ahead and from our perspective, I think where I've mentioned that our focus in terms of our online purchasing experience has mostly been around experience. We're also starting to look into our device upgrades and the experience that we can create around those online. Now that does get into the clinical channel as well. Potentially, there are big reimbursement considerations that we need to take into account. There's configuration. It's a bit of an untapped opportunity for us at the moment, and clearly there's an experience side to that for our customers. But whether that there's also a more of a sort of a commercial opportunity in making sure that in a more timely manner that our customers are on the latest technology, because they can upgrade the externals, is what I'm talking about, the sound processor, the part that looks like a hearing aid, the implant you have for life that is implanted, but the externals you can generally upgrade every, say, 5 to 6 years, and often people aren't aware of that. The process can be quite lengthy and clunky when you consider reimbursement and those sorts of factors. So starting to look into that over time, I think, is a big opportunity that's very specific for us.
Thank you, Tony. Simon?
Yeah, look, I think looking at cloud infrastructure for sure is something that's going to be a pathway for us. I found personally that technology sort of avenues that we've been pursuing locally now, we've got to come back into the fold because we've got another direction globally. So trying to join those dots is interesting. The timing of it. On the other hand, I've certainly reversed my view where I think the feeling for Australia for me was we had to go our own path. Now I'm seeing some really good investment globally in big platforms, but of course you have to adapt to that as well. So it's just trying to balance the pace of how things are rolled out. I mean, certainly we're going to be now, I think, in a mindset of continuous release. And what I saw when I joined was end of life system. So I'm very similar. It's quite kind of uncanny what Tony's saying, because I'm in exactly the same position with an end of life platform, which you never want to be in that position. But that's because there hasn't been investment over time, and people forget that they are exposed with other distractions in business, that suddenly a platform that looked new is suddenly old. So I think what we will do now, and we have been doing in other parts of the business like CRM, is having just continuous release. So there's always a release calendar, there's always a cycle. Yes, there's a bit of a negotiation to be had between countries around priority. So that has to be governed by someone. You can't have just you can't have 15 countries all debating or even arguing about what's important. You have to have some governance there. So the governance piece is more important moving forward, but the continuous release cycle and that calendar where that there's going to be 3 or 4 releases and you can plan to that. I think that's something I'm seeing now evolving, which I think will be really good for our business.
Great, thank you. Andy, what are you seeing as trends coming up in the healthcare industry related to your space?
Well, I think, first of all, a lot of what Tony said is a really good representation of where I think these industries are going. And in healthcare, and particularly if you listen to Tony's example, where it sounds like now that they've helped provide awareness, education, and sort of patient onboarding on the upfront side, really listening to customers and stepping into the journey of supporting them when they have the product and driving events down the lane. That's very representative of the kind of growth that we see in health. Just continually innovating based on where your customers are at.
Thank you. What about you, Dan? Was there anything you're seeing coming up with regards to our clients connecting the dots and what they need to think about now in preparedness for what's coming down in a few years' time? Or are they even thinking out that far?
The good news is yes. Like Simon said, I think the difference to even 3 years ago is businesses are now realizing that it's a continual investment, right? It's not something that you build and leave for a number of years and then come back to it and start again. It's something you have to continually invest in, which is good news because it's an evolvement then rather than a re-platform, which is Simon's kind of alluded to there. So that's one thing, and they're definitely thinking ahead, which is great. I think the other key one for me is around commerce and content and how those two worlds merge together. Yes, there is always going to be a need for great merchandising and products to move along that journey from a path to purchase point of view, but how are we actually nudging them along from awareness through to education, through to inspiration? What are the themes and things that we're doing in order to add value to that purchase journey? We often talk about price within commerce. If you're focused purely on the product, it's only kind of one way down. How else are we adding value to the customer? Content is one of the ways that we can do that, and bringing those worlds together is often a really good way to do that.
Great, thank you, Daniel. Well, we've got 10 minutes left. I'm going to open it up to the guests on the webinar to ask any questions. Philip, do we have any questions coming through on the chat? No, no questions? Okay, great. Well, I think if there was any other comments coming from our guest panelists, did you want to share any more before we conclude? Any lasting thoughts?
No, just as I said, it's always nice to know you're not alone.
Yeah, likewise, Tony.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah,
I'm
it's a
sure
good
we're
conversation.
both jumping off the call and back to the grindstone and dealing with consistent challenges. That's always good to know you're not alone.
Yeah,
in that.
yeah, that is a good feeling.
And lovely to be able to connect the two of you. Thank you.
Yeah,
and
likewise.
thanks, Andy, for joining us in California.
Yeah, thank you very much.
I can see the election
Nice
in the
to meet you.
reflection of your artwork behind. So good luck with that.
Thank
Take
you.
care, everybody. Have a good evening.
Thanks,
Have a good
everybody.
day.